It might be that he's like using the reverse chords from this song called Deterioration, which is my favorite of his album that he's released. And that's like sad, and this is like patient in a different way.
It is patient. It's really beautiful.
Isn't it?
It's like added another layer now. I know that it's well too. It's very lovely.
Yeah. I asked him for it. It took him about a week, man. It was wild.
That kid is crazy good.
Unreal. So, shall we begin?
Yeah.
Okay. So this was about liminal identity. I wasn't sure about the title, about what exactly to call it. Like, is it liminal identity? Is it liminality? Is it identity? Is it some other thing? You know? But because that's what we said, again, there's the 6 questions, so I'm going to ask them. Maybe it'll be 2 hours, maybe it'll be less, but whatever. The first question was, what is liminality, right? Because you have to define your terms.
Okay. I have to define my terms.
Well, we do.
Okay.
In conversation, right?
Yeah. Liminality, in my understanding, I think there's a few different, because it also goes back to like different philosophies and stuff as well, but I think essentially what I understand of it is that it is usually a space or a feeling that happens when one phase ends and then another one is about to begin.
Yeah. But
it's like the space in between. There's like a sort of weird limbo.
That makes me think of like the bardo, like in Tibetan, the death myth, right? Between reincarnations, there's the bardo, which is like the space in between, you know?
Yes, it feels exactly like that. So that's my feeling and understanding of it.
Okay, so it's like, and how does so I guess we could start with that. I do have a lot of questions because it's like,
fire them at me.
Well, these aren't, like, in what way do you feel that? Like, how do you feel that in your body, in your mind, in yourself? That's one, right?
Okay.
Then it's like, what is the importance of that to you? But I suppose we'll get to that and, all that kind of thing. But yeah, how do you feel it? Because like, I can get a sense of like that kind of deep psychological vibe, kind of intuition thing, but like.
But you mean just physically, emotionally at the moment?
For you, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question actually, because I don't think I've thought about it in that sense. Well, I suppose I have. So for me, I feel it in my body in terms of like relating it to gender.
Okay.
And like the gender and sexuality part of me. So I think because I've always felt like I haven't been one thing or another thing. So physically for me, I've always felt very neutral. I think I might have mentioned that before, where I just so gender wise, like sometimes I feel feminine and sometimes I feel quite masculine, but like a lot of the time I don't really have like a feeling towards gender. Like I just feel myself.
Yeah.
But then I find it really hard to relate to others and their experience of gender and how they see their body and how they want to present themselves.
Sure.
So that then, I guess, physically kind of keeps me feeling like I'm kind of like stuck almost in this not knowing.
Yeah. And
I think it feels like at the moment I'm going through this whole process of like trying to accept that, because I don't know, I think the world is really geared up to making sure that you are one thing or another. Like it has to be very binary, and I don't even mean in gender, but like just generally. Like
to categorize to understand. Right?
Yeah, you must be pigeonholed or like titled or something.
Titles, that's a great word for it,
Because, like for example, when people like, so how do you identify? Like at the moment I say non-binary, and I think that fits what I feel the most, but I still don't really click with it, because I was talking to a really good friend recently about this, and
it's a non,
like it's not very nice to be like, you're not something.
It's just not a thing, it's like it's a reaction to a thing.
And so we were speaking about, and it really hit home for me, it's just like often I pick these titles because it makes it easier to explain to other people my experience of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say titles, because I've been writing this book for like 10 years, and the first chapter, the first character that I'm like now coming back to editing, because I'm working on it at the moment.
Yeah.
And the character, he's like, trying to ask these questions about like why are you the way you are,
Mm-hmm.
and the character responds with the word titles and just leaves it at that.
Yeah.
And then he never says anything else. And I think that's an interesting word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it feels, you can obviously title yourself, fine, but for me it almost feels like titles are put upon you or given to you in some way.
Yeah, the words that are used, right?
Yeah, and trying to conform to them to essentially have an easier life.
Yeah.
Which is something that I think is fair and understandable. But then
In what way? Like that you conform to it, or what's fair or understandable?
Yeah, I think when I was younger anyway, for example, like I would fight being comfortable, or like the idea of settling or whatever would be like, oh my god, that's the worst thing ever. Like, why would you ever want to settle down or like be comfortable, you know?
Yeah.
And then as you get older, you realise that life's actually really fucking hard. Like, it's quite nice to be comfortable, and so I can understand why people would just want to be comfortable or take the easy route, you know, the path of least resistance or whatever. And especially marginalised groups as well.
I think that's one side of being comfortable in the sense that you mean it. I think another is it's doing what you're told you should do because that's what you think you should do. Right?
Yeah.
That's what you're taught you should do, and so you do to be comfortable because that way you're doing everything that you should. And you know, and whatever.
You don't get hassled, people leave you alone, you know.
Yeah. And then, you know, whether or not that's what you want, right?
Yeah, because then the other flip side of that is like, it robs you of experience potentially, or
robs you of yourself, you know, you're no longer doing thinking even about what you want. You're thinking about how well you are doing or how better to do what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah.
Exactly, or like always striving to be something that you're not as well.
Yeah, and that's just one thing. That's just one side of things. But like, you know, being comfortable in for you means something else than what were you saying about marginalised groups? One like being.
Well, just so in terms of like, you know, being queer, for example.
Yeah.
Like it's much easier to say not be queer, like to put on that mask and to kind of hide it, and you know. Like, you know, ticks into shame and stuff for a lot of people too.
Yeah, for real.
And
that was what the previous episode was about, was like largely about the effects of shame and the teachings of shame, you know, some of them, you know.
It's so damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you know, that's why historically as well, and we still have it now, when people have marriages of convenience, or like, you know, they just don't come out and they just try and appear heterosexual, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just get, you know, position themselves or get positioned into institutions that, again, they didn't choose, right?
Yeah.
Or they chose, you know, because of the available choices.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah. And you know, and a lot of it just boils down to safety and stuff too. And like I'm aware of like my privilege in terms of like I appear cisgendered, I'm white, I'm middle class, like I have all of this stuff going for me, so like I actually have quite an easy ride of it, and I'm aware of that. But but it's still sort of you know, I don't know, it still puts me in this like weird space of like, I feel like, again, I don't feel queer enough. Like I don't feel, I'm definitely not straight, but like, you know, if identifying as pansexual, there's sort of a side of me that's like, well, you know, I'm not cutting out the idea of being with a guy again, you know.
Yeah.
But then it kind of brings in all of this idea of like.
But is the question is guy as an identity or guy as a sexuality, as a sex, or as a sexual act as well? Because like, you know, there's a difference, right?
Yeah. Totally, yeah.
So you know, being with a guy can mean many things in a way.
Do you mean in terms of the act?
I mean, you say you're not.
What you mean?
It's not off the cards to be with a guy. But, you know, is that talking about like sex with a man as well as being with a guy? You know what I mean? As an identity, right?
Yeah, I mean like the whole thing really, you know. And so, but it like having one of these, like if I was just I am gay or like I am a lesbian, then for me there would be more kind of like. More like a finality, a kind of clearer,
like title.
Just, you know, I stick my flag in the ground and be like, "This is what I'm on this side."
Right.
Exactly.
It's not liminal, right?
It's not liminal, you know, and so like I kind of almost like dream about that in a way, because I'm like, God, that would be so much easier, you know.
It's not a non. You're not non-gay.
Yeah.
You're not non-hetero,
Yeah.
non-straight, non-gay.
I'm not like straight enough to be in this crowd
Yeah.
over here, but then I feel,
Yeah.
and this is not anything that anyone has said to me.
No, but you're right.
It's-
Yeah.
I don't feel gay enough to be
Yeah,
like.
yeah. I mean, I've had this conversation with other trans or other groups as well. Like
Yeah.
you leave one group
Mhm.
recognizing that you don't organize yourself in the same way.
Yeah.
To say it one way. And then you go into the next one and it's like, but you're not enough, or
Yes.
there's a whole internal structure of shame, if nothing, and all of its offshoots, I was going to say like, whatever, just shame, within the group itself, because of internalized shame, because of responding to, because of human nature underneath it all,
Yeah.
So
relating it back to feeling liminal.
Yeah.
I feel really
between.
None.
Right. Is it not enough always, or is it? Because that's the question now, I think, and this is where I was going to go with it. It's like now, I get a sense, I don't know how true it is, but I get a sense the conversation is more becoming the kind of spectrum concept overall across all things,
Yeah.
So it's like really, which is closer to the fluid concept, The spectrum, I think, is necessarily like kind of like the stress, strain, mental health, mental well-being concept. It's like the spectrum too, right? And it's just the more stress you add, the more like you shift it one way towards ill mental health, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, it's around sexuality and identity, because those are the two categories that we're talking about for you in particular. Would you say? Because I know there's autism as well. Like
yes, but they're all
just one diversity, right? That's kind of what
and
I'm
they're
saying.
all part of like
one difference,
big machine.
Yeah,
for me in a way,
the human thing that is you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I just referred to myself as a machine.
I mean, it's not too far off, right?
Yeah, which it's just like it feels very dehumanizing.
Yeah, but humans are like brilliant machines, aren't they?
Oh yeah,
that's nothing else than that. It's all just systems anyway.
Yeah,
it's just language to talk about the thing that is far, far, far
this
more.
Podcast's gonna go like have an offshoot where I'm like, oh my god,
we're gonna blow each other's minds. Yeah, let's do it. But no, but like it is. It's just they're just words to talk about a thing that we can't really. It's way more complicated and we can't really simplify into words anyway. So, but this is what I mean about difference. Like it is now. I think, at least for me, this is how I think about it. I think this is how you think about it. I think it's becoming more of a thing that your intersectionality, I think, is becoming more of a global concept, right? It's like everyone is intersectional in their own unique way. Some have more privilege than others. Some have more whatever than others, like healthy family structures, whatever else might be important to being human, right? Or be part of that. And in this case, neurodiversity is becoming much more, a focus of understanding, I think, if nothing else. And sex and gender are too, right? That's what the whole trans conversation is about. It's about this increasing exposure to a conversation that wasn't previously a conversation.
Because those two also like overlap so much as well.
Yeah, autism and sexual difference, or whatever you want to call it.
Which blew my mind when I started learning about that, because for me it makes a lot of sense to be a neurodiverse person.
Because nothing is organised in the same way.
No, not at all. And it like explained a lot about my life, sort of feeling liminal. Kind of like always looking back, and even when I was younger, I always felt like I kind of just didn't fit. And not in a kind of like let's get out our tiny violin kind of way. It was just like I was still kind of
a recognition.
Yeah, I was still pretty happy as a kid. It's just that like I just recognised that like other kids would do stuff and I wouldn't really get it. I wouldn't understand why, or why they did things a certain way, or like certain things would distress me, and and like Did you always feel on the outside as a response to that, like the liminal? It's not quite in. Yes.
Is it not quite out, or is it out?
It didn't feel quite out either, because also
you had friends and you had
I had some friends when I was younger. Like I remember I wouldn't do very well in big groups, but I would still have like a very close core set of like maybe 2-3 people. So I didn't feel completely out and isolated, which I'm really grateful for. But it just always felt like it was just, I don't know, it just always felt in the middle. Which is such an odd space to be in.
Yeah. I think that brings me to my second question, is what is identity? Because, like, you know, that's where the two need to overlap in this conversation, right? It's like the edge of liminality is just never quite, like, being, you know.
I feel like this is edging towards, like, who am I?
Yeah, I was going way more into, like brain states.
Okay, right. Because who am I is too big for question number 2 right now.
No, what is identity? Like, define the terms, right? Like, what are the terms of identity?
I suppose for me, like, I would love to be able to be like, if somebody said to me, like, what's your identity? Like, what are you about? Could you explain yourself?
Please do.
In, like, a nugget.
Go for it.
Like, I don't know if I can.
No, that's okay. But what is identity? Like, start with that. If you like, what are the categories or the terms of identity? How do you understand it?
I suppose I would understand it as, like, for me, it would be like kind of my morals and ethics of like, what do I believe in?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So what do I believe in?
Yeah. Question. Yeah, real.
That's very broad.
That's broad, but like the question, the focus of identity for me these days is about like those categories that are otherwise, you know, like in the Discrimination Act, right? Like they're kind of, those are the terms of identity, right? Religion, ethnicity, you know, social background, class, religion, you know, let's say wealth and level of education in there, you know. Those are your identities, right? Sexuality, and now autism being much more of a class of its own, right? We position ourselves more and more as we enter the conversation of autism on an unconscious spectrum of like, it's an interesting point. Like, I don't really want to get into this, but maybe we will. But like, it's this conversation about where to position everyone / anyone on the autism spectrum, what the autism spectrum means. Because when I learned about the autism spectrum, I learned it as a model for disability, because I was working with disability, right? So for me, autism means something usually very specific about like, how severe is this?
Yes. In
the sense of how does it affect your sensory capacity and your learning capacity? Social capacity is a different one for me. It's like much more difficult to define and organize, like qualify that, right? But learning capacity, you can see it. There are fundamental differences between some, like on the capacity to learn scale, right? I think that's fair to say. And then the other one was like developmental, I suppose. But so if I learned it as a model for disability, and now it's much more used as a model for social relation in a way, like how well, how do I understand myself socially? How do I behave? How do I feel socially? So yeah, like
it was interesting you said as well, like where you place everybody on the spectrum, because I guess that's a difficult point as well, because not everyone is on the spectrum.
Not everyone is on the spectrum.
Yeah, so it's then like helping people to understand that not everyone is autistic. Yeah. Like neurodiverse is different to being on an ASD spectrum as well. Yeah. But I do agree with you in that it's become almost like, oh, hey, you're neurospicy. you know, like let's connect, or like there's that kind of thing where it does seem to be weirdly kind of connecting people through a shared experience, or the way in which they perceive the world, or like
but I feel like for me, what I notice most about the neurodiversity conversation or term, it's like it's a way for de-shaming things. You know, it's like it fundamentally, if you're owning autism, you know, you're fundamentally de-shaming like difference or a sense of wrongfulness in your identity, which is so taught socially and conditioning on the deepest levels, you know, shame and questioning, doubting, denying yourself, right? Yeah, and if you are different or someone else is different, then it's teamed with fear as well. Exactly. Like we should be fearful of it. So in many ways, I don't know if a lot of the people who I know have said that they are neurodiverse, if they are, even myself, right? You know, because it's like, again, I see it as a model for disability, like rather than a model for social difference. You know, and not that that's wrong. It's just that that's how I learned it. Yeah. So it's hard for me to recategorize it. Like I understand what autism means. I understand it because I know. You know, again, maybe because I am, maybe because I've been so exposed to it, but to other people that are.
but it's a very interesting conversation to me, like where the edge of autism is.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my point. That's the question.
Like where's the
edge? Yeah, because people I talk to, I never get a sense that they know the edge. I never get a sense that there's an edge that's being discussed.
Yeah.
Where's the edge? Because
what
I learned as a model for disability.
Yeah, we're learning what it looks like in reality as we're talking about it, because like the classic, stereotypical person that might be autistic that we all seem to know is that young kind of like boy that doesn't know how to socially interact and can't control his emotions or doesn't have any emotions and is obsessed with trains and really good at maths. Exactly.
It's the first one that got so exposed.
Exactly. And so now that we're seeing different individuals who are autistic that don't fit that in any way, it's kind of
because it's so broad, it could mean anything.
Well, exactly.
I mean, fundamentally, in the expression of a single human being, it could mean anything.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Where's the edge? And I don't necessarily want to get into that conversation today, but I do want to come. It's going to be part of this conversation.
Sure. I feel like where's the edge is a good question.
It's a background. Where is the edge even for liminality? That's true.
Yeah,
that's a very good question.
Like how, like I'm.
What is inside? What's outside?
I'm in this space of like, when do I know when like I'm out of this liminal space? Will I ever be out of this liminal space?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know whether I will be in terms of my physicality, my gender, and my sexuality. I don't know whether that's just going to be like an ongoing.
Is physicality related to gender and sexuality?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, like definitely, because naturally people look at each other and we do make assumptions.
Because I identify you typically in my head as she.
Yeah, because I understand that I'm smaller, petite, I have long hair, like I have feminine features.
Yeah.
So I personally don't get upset if people want to refer to me as she, her, or like they refer to me as a female or like whatever. Mm-hmm. I completely get it that other people do find that really upsetting because it's so deeply distressing.
But when you see yourself deeper, you see not she, you see something else.
Yeah.
I do. Right now, I see something else.
Yeah,
for sure.
I definitely see something else. Yeah. And like I said, there's days where I will look in the mirror and
I get
feel
it. It's
really
fluid,
bit
right? Like naturally as well. That's what liminality is about.
I see. I don't know really what it is, but it's really corny, but like the only way I can say it is like I just see me.
Yeah, of course.
And it feels kind of detached from
gender and
like the physicality of
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's how I experience the world and myself.
Yeah. And naturally then as a result the world becomes other people and how they experience you and how you experience them experiencing you.
Yes.
Which is social interaction, right?
Yeah.
Your subjective experience of it, at least.
Yeah. So I think that will be an ongoing thing for me through my life, is kind of like just working on myself to become more and more accepting of that.
Yeah.
To find ease and like comfort, going back to that comfort thing in it.
Exactly.
But I think.
Is that the goal, to be comfortable with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like in a dream world, I'd love for everyone to know and understand, and but essentially there's people in my life that might never get it.
Is that's a very important, interesting point to bring into this, that I'm glad you floated. It's like I mean, I'm like already losing the question, but it's kind of like the what makes us comfortable with something. I was going to ask the question, actually, this is it. It's like, does comfort in social relations and understanding in social relations, mutual, does it begin with other people not thinking of you as she, but as thinking of you as you? Like, is that kind of what the expectation?
I don't think so, but I think that's an important part of it. I think
level would need to, like, not expectation, but like where the level of understanding would need to be for it to just be forgotten as a gender and sexuality thing.
Yeah, I think it does need to come from me first, because I think I understand that other people will always think a certain way about me when they meet me or when they see me. And so there's like an acceptance within me of just being like, well, some people are going to misgender me, for example, if we use that word. Mm-hmm. So I feel like the real work is it's got to come from me first.
Which means
that I have to get really comfortable with who I am. And I think when you feel like, if you feel like you haven't been seen, or like you've kind of been I don't know, like buried, maybe.
Why?
you then kind of have to, I almost feel like at the moment I feel like I'm kind of coming out swinging, like I'm coming out fighting, like I really want to fight for it and like show up as myself, like you kind of have to come out like, you know, chest bared, and I kind of want to get, even though that's a really important and beautiful part of it, I kind of want to get through that phase of like not having to fight for it all the time and kind of just settling in and just being like, cool, I'm okay with this now. And because I think that's a huge argument about, you know, in the queer community as well, of like, why do you have to shove it down our throats, and, you know, the whole pride thing, and it's because there's been people for their whole lives that have been erased, buried, abused, you know, so like you want to come out and be like, this is who I am, and you want to be proud of it and be free with it and feel safe.
I think also like at Pride itself, I think I was talking about this recently, it's like you're in a community of people that are not judging you, that don't misgender you or identify you or relate to you on those levels, because you're surrounded by a celebrating free gay and other community, like you know,
it's beautiful.
I mean, it's just a totally different form of social relation around gender and sexuality, because it's you know, you're relating to yourself differently about your gender and sexuality, so you surround yourself and in a city, in a road or whatever, of people who are doing the same thing, and you no longer feel shamed in a daily way, which is, you know, where the discrimination happens, right? It's the daily occurrences.
The Pride events that I've been to, it almost feels like I can just breathe for a day, you know, like you just go and you just know that everyone around you.
It's like going to a gay club to dance, right?
Exactly, you know, you can just feel safe for a while, and it feels loving. It feels very loving as well, because you spend a lot of your time as well, like, you know, as a queer person, kind of just not even like, you know, not even necessarily in a really severely negative situation, but just kind of just being neutral, or just sort of holding it back a bit, or like not being your full self, you know, and everyone else gets to be the full selves every day.
Or is not limited by the same structural problems every day, because, you know, everyone has their own
everyone's got their own shit,
relative shit, but the structural problems are different.
Yes, exactly.
So honest,
so I think it's definitely got to come from me first to kind of be to find that comfort. And I think for me, comfort is really linked to safety and feeling safe. And I don't mean necessarily a physical safety, even though that is part of it, but I think more of an emotional safety, with like being around loved ones who understand, or at least are accepting, you know, and that kind of like, it helps you to feel safe, and if you feel safe, then you can relax, and then you can be comfortable, and you don't have to constantly think like, have I said something that's gonna give me away, or like it's gonna upset someone, you know, that's a big thing.
Is there gonna be offense in the room for something that is you know, absolutely inoffensive,
which is mad, right? Because like people might have known me my whole life and I'm still that same person, but as soon as you say particular words or titles...
I was talking to exactly. I was talking to a guy in Australia, like 80-year-old, beautiful man in so many ways, then found out he was terribly racist, right? Like terribly racist, right?
Okay.
And we had to then stand in front of like a machine for like 6 hours together sorting potatoes, right? And I took the opportunity, I guess, to talk to him like about this, and I was like, we got basically picked up by like absolute strangers and put in this farm. It was beautiful, right?
Okay.
Like it was some crazy beautiful shit what happened there, and this man was beautiful too, but he was terribly racist, right? Maybe because no one had the conversation with him. I wouldn't know. Who knows? But I was like, if you saw me on the street, right, and I was like hitchhiking, would you pick me up? You know? And he probably said yes, you know? And like, if I like, and then I told you I was Muslim, what would you do, you know? Like, what if I told you I was Muslim now? Like, we've spent months together. We love each other, right? Like, there was this deep love in this relationship. And I was like, what if I told you I was Muslim? Because I never came up, right? Like, what would you think about me? What would you think about our relationship at this point? And he didn't really answer, but it was the more important of getting the question across. Like, how do you fucking know why is it that important? You know.
You think you got him thinking though?
I hope,
which
but
is
like
starting the ball rolling. Maybe.
I hope, but more important for me
or
was
he just
just
hated
not.
you.
Maybe in that moment he just hated me because it wasn't the only part. You know, it happens. But for me, it wasn't even about shaming him or making him think or anything like that. It was more like I didn't feel comfortable with not having the conversation.
Yeah.
Because it was deeply upsetting. Right.
Yeah.
Like the level of the thing he's, of the racism, right?
That sounds horrible.
It was devastating for a moment.
So you felt a responsibility to be that ally.
At least in that moment, I was like, "What the fuck?" You know?
Yeah. So would you say that you felt unsafe in that moment? In a sense, or did it not go that far?
No. It was more just a point of discrimination, right? Against any category, against any title. Fundamentally, that's all it is.
You said some words, and then things change.
But
you didn't change as a person.
You as a person were the same throughout, liminal or not, right? Yeah. But the moment that there is a title, there isn't a title. Anyway, third question: what is your origin story of liminal identity?
Wow.
Yeah. We don't need to go into everything.
No,
of course, but that was an important question because it is so personal.
I feel like it's quite new in a way, even though we've spoken about I've been myself my whole life.
Yeah.
But I think it's those new levels of awareness that you get as you get older.
Is the thing, yeah.
And also
experience followed by awareness.
Yeah. And going through training as a therapist as well, and kind of having those. It kind of gets pummeled into you that you have to think about every single tiny little thing that you experience and do.
What was that? One of my clients is using the term at the moment, agonizing reappraisal.
Yes, right? That's a great phrase. Yeah. So there's the agonizing reappraisal. But it's also beautiful because it
awareness is fundamental, right? To living consciously, it's important. That's why therapy is interesting.
Yeah,
because it's a conversation about awareness, right? What you're aware of.
Yeah, and I think it's been a huge part of me getting to know who I really am deep down underneath it all.
Becoming self-aware. But
yes,
in a real way, in a de-shaming, non-judgmental way.
Yeah, and it's part of that kind of getting to that comfort that we were just speaking about as well. But I think,
what is your origin story then? If we can, I think it's just an interesting term, like the origin story. How did I become aware, or
I guess my awareness probably happened over the last year or so.
Right.
I always knew that I was queer in some sense. So when I was younger, I was like, oh, I'm bi. I ignored it when I was sort of early teens. And then as I kind of got into my teens and stuff, it attached to that. And then...
What are we saying, 12, 15 kind
of
space? Yeah.
And then as I kind of got older, went to uni and stuff, it then kind of developed into that. And so it was bi the whole time. But
You were saying before, if it's okay for us to re-mention it now, that at uni you sort of moved more into the sort of feminine presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, because I think there was that. I think at that age as well, there's that need to kind of want to be. For me, anyway, there was that need to kind of want to be seen and kind of almost I don't know, sought after, and I wanted to feel attractive, but I think social constructs kind of make it seem like you have to, as a woman, you have to appear feminine in order to want to be desired and wanted. And also because I was in...
By men?
Yeah. I think essentially I wanted it by women as well, and other people of other genders, but it felt more accepting.
Yeah.
And therefore safer in that aspect to kind of want it from men. So that's kind of built in it in terms of that kind of liminality was already there, because even bisexual is still being attracted to two genders. And then I think it's kind of we skip forward kind of probably into my therapist training, and especially going to
5, 6 years ago, 4 years ago,
4 years ago, and then very recently going to my placement, and and working with people who I then started to realise I really connected with, and that's, you know, it kind of made me realise, oh, this is why I'm so passionate about it, because it actually reflects a lot of who I am. It started to make me realise that I had this like liminality in me, and kind of teaming that with then like the breakdown of a very long-term relationship that was very heteronormative.
It was most of your adult life.
It was most of my
All
adult
of your
life.
adult life.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe.
Yeah. And a lot of it was very happy.
Yeah.
And then, but there was always this part of me that like knew that something else was going on, or there was like other needs that needed to be met, and like not even sexual, but just like a whole other part of me. And so I think all of that's kind of like over this last year where I've had like a really big year, it's just been all of those parts have kind of suddenly started colliding and clumping together like some kind of like, I don't know, new planet forming or something.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like messy and horrendous, but like
initially.
Then
you have life, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's going to turn into something beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to just be left out at the end like Pluto, where they're like, we're not really sure what this one is. It's just out there being...
No, we were talking about a life on our planet earlier.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So I think my origin story in a really long time has kind of been this last year, and I think the breakdown of that relationship was partly me kind of like growing as a person and going off in like a different direction. As well as other like complications and stuff that came with it. But
was it from separating that your identity could be more freely sort of addressed, or what made the difference?
I think so, because I think this is now the first time that I'm being like freely single and myself. Like I make my own rules now. I can live in my own space how I want, and I don't necessarily mean that in terms of like I was held back or anything, but it just the dynamics are different. Like regardless of like the health of your relationship,
you're in a different situation and
like you have to
relationships and system.
Yeah, you have to be mindful of the other person when you're in a relationship and what they want, and you have to be respectful and.
Yeah, we certainly are. We certainly are.
Yeah.
Try to be, kind and aware of the other person for sure. But there are certain expectations of maybe again it was like, I don't know if this is on the recording or not, but like living to shoulds, living to to what we are either taught to want or do or think is important. And then also what you sort of get caught up into over time, Not to say that this relationship was not worthy of your time. That's not what I'm saying.
No, I didn't hear it that way. But no, it's true, and so I think I like definitely. I was going to say present a different way in that relationship. I suppose that is true, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't being true. And it was
I get you.
fully committed and everything. But like now that I'm out of it, it's kind of like given me almost like this weird but wonderful time of like self-exploration, and not having to kind of worry about, is this going to upset someone, or I can literally just explore now and figure it out on my own, and it's kind of like really lovely now that I'm kind of through the grief stage and the sadness and stuff. It's like this really exciting time, and so I'm kind of now leaning into it more than ever.
There's an interesting point to this, and I don't even know how long we've been going. An interesting question to the origin story for me was and it always is with sort of psychological processes, psychological periods. It's like I kind of almost want to get to the level of detail, like what were the thought processes that were happening, in real time. Like what was the kind of almost actual process of understanding self as liminal in this case, but re-examining your identity.
Yeah.
How did it happen, almost, or what was going on inside that story?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
There was definitely a moment that I remember. There was just a day where I was just like, fuck, I think I'm non-binary. I think that's what this is. And and I get really, really frustrated at people who say, why do you have to put a label on it? And I think maybe those people haven't ever needed to label things for themselves to help them understand what's going on for them, because for me it meant that I went from this phase of like just feeling very lost and like not knowing, not being able to connect with myself properly, which becomes very isolating. And you know, I went through like loads of depression and stuff as a younger person, because like depression and anxiety, which I now don't really deal with that much anymore, you know, like and I recognize now that it's because I was really struggling with like knowing who the hell I was and what made me happy and what made me feel good. And to get to that point over the last couple of years of just being like, oh, this makes total sense and it feels right. I remember there was a day where I said to my ex, like, you know, I think this is a thing for me, and it felt like to say that out loud felt so huge, and I think that's also why I felt like it was definitely right and important, because I think if I'd said it and it didn't have that massive feeling behind it,
because the feeling is the real language of the self,
like a self-actualization. You know, it's huge. And it was also really scary to say, because there was that vulnerability of being like, how is this going to be received? And I remember at the time it was received with a okay. And that wasn't satisfying at the time, you know, which some people might be like, that's the best response, you know. Someone was just like, okay, whatever.
I'm cracking into
please do. You get this at anyone else's house?
Okay. No, I've never seen this. In case, like,
it's a good ASMR.
It is good ASMR, I'd say. Probably terrible audio though.
That's what happens when I put a bowl of M&Ms in front of you.
Necessary sensory feedback.
But I remember kind of like, I almost wanted to be embraced and like, I don't know, picked up and been like, that's amazing, like I'm so happy for you, like, you know, I wanted to be you're busy. There was like a real kind of maybe it felt like a childlike moment, like I wanted to almost to be scooped up and just like celebrated and way, you know, like thrown in the air or whatever, and like a, you know, really joyful moment. And it kind of was just like and you know, and it kind of, I think that.
When you told your therapist, was that this moment? Who was it that you told this?
It was my ex.
Your ex, when you told them.
Right. And it for me, I received that as like quite a sad thing. I don't know whether they necessarily meant it that way. I think for them they were just like, okay, I think it was like they kind of just accepted me for whatever was going on with me, you know. And maybe they didn't quite get the gravitas of it, and you know. But that I remember that was my feeling. And in terms of like origin stories, I remember that was like a really kind of like pinnacle moment in this kind of like kind of journey of self-discovery, for lack of a less cheesy phrase. And but then it's just made sense since then, you know.
It's another way that you are liminal. But also, because the thing with titles is like, it is about organizing defining yourself, right? Your sense of experience and of who you are, you know.
It's kind of like one thing that pops up for me as well is it's kind of tribal in terms of like, you know, when you're a teenager and like, I don't know whether you did, but I think a lot of teenagers like assign themselves to like really enjoying a certain type of music or following certain bands and stuff, and there's kind of like this tribalism that happens, and that like if you find people who also like that music or that band, like you connect with them, and you know, and you hate anyone else who doesn't like that kind of music, you know, they're rubbish, like but it's community and it's you know, and it's connection, and I think that is part of this as well, is you know, we need titles because you need to find your tribe, you know, I find being liminal is quite a beautiful thing, but I also find it quite scary, and it kind of comes back to that isolation. And like my friend who has similar experiences, like I feel so grateful that I have them to talk to, because they are in a similar space. And like a word that comes up quite a lot is it can be lonely and like really isolating, because it's hard to like I've had quite a few close friends sort of say to me like, I'm glad you told me, but I can't understand it, like I just can't, like, I don't know, connect with that way of seeing the world or, you know, being or whatever. And then so
I almost want to ask, why do you think that is, but I don't know if that's a distracting sort of question from your story. And
I don't know. Like one of my good friends recently, who I love to bits, but like, you know, they were one of the people that said it to me, and it was a really lovely conversation. But I appreciated their honesty as well, and just being like, and their reason for was just that, you know, they are male, they have male genitals, like, you know, they are attracted to women. I think it was more that they were like, this is my experience and I can't really understand an experience outside of that. Yeah, and so they were like, I can't really understand why you would see it any other way, especially
I'm always curious about this question from them, like, when they're watching porn, do they never look at the dick? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I'll get back to you another
I always think about this.
Yeah. So yeah, that was their answer, and I don't know whether maybe many people are like that as well, in that they, you know, they understand the world from their experience.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question, I suppose, that this links to, actually, the conversation about loss and about re-identification, or addressing the question, you know, who am I? Was how comfortable are you with liminal identity, your identity, your lack of definition within the particular groups that exist, groupings of identity that exist? How comfortable are you with liminality, or your own liminality, I suppose?
I don't know at the moment. Maybe that means not that comfortable at the moment, because it almost feels like I'm falling through space forever. You know.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah.
Again, the book I mentioned earlier. That's how the book begins. It's falling through space.
Really?
Forever, yeah.
Okay, that's so weird. That's wild.
Yeah.
I promise I haven't read it. I haven't read it.
I mean, maybe you have.
No, I haven't.
No,
you know I'm bad with reading books. You know,
maybe I'm just writing the book that we've all read. Yeah.
like falling or floating, it just feels like I'm in a big never-ending space of like, you know, and I don't really know where it's going to go, and so that in itself is sort of like, you know, we think of space, we think of an abyss, we think of like just the blackest, like void. No light, like a void, basically, you know, and so that in itself is kind of scary, because I'm just like, I think we were talking earlier before this about like, you know, like clothing and stuff, and like how I feel in myself like, am I just gonna have a life of like never knowing how the fuck to dress myself, or like what feels comfortable, like you know, how I present or anything, and so that. How
much do you play with it?
Like a little bit, not loads, but I'd like to play more.
Yeah.
But then I also feel like I'm like financially restricted in that sense as well. Because I'd love to have.
I mean, you know, like you got a charity shop, like.
Oh yeah, trust me. Like I buy everything on Vinted.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
like Vinted is cheap as fuck.
It
like
is
money is restrictive, yes, but
yes,
like, you have access to like basically everything for like less than a tenner now.
Yeah.
You know.
So I'm trying to do that more.
Yeah.
Because again, I think
it's an interesting question. I don't.
Yeah.
You know, I'm fairly steady in my identity, right? I'd say. So I like have a style that I like, and I just do the same thing every day, and it works very well for cost, because I never need to spend anything either.
Yeah, well, that's which is also helpful. I think I'm like sort of headed towards a particular way of dressing that's kind of like more neutral, which sounds a bit boring, but more neutral in terms of like, I don't want to dress hyper feminine or hyper masculine. Yeah. Like I just want to be like this nice middle ground, like this nice liminal space.
Is the liminality somewhere in between all of it? Is that kind of it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Like an inner edge to everything. Yeah.
I think I'm very happy in those middle spaces, and like also I'm such a Libra. Like, you know, like it's so funny that like even my star sign is like a pair of scales that's like balanced. You know? It's just when will it end? I was cursed from the beginning. You know, like I was born in the middle of the month. You know, like, it's just like so much bullshit. But yeah, so there's like just this feeling of like feeling a bit lost. Quite a lot. You know. And then sometimes I feel moments of like, oh, this feels quite nice, I'll do this for a bit, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I hate that, and then I don't want to do it anymore. You know? Like maybe that's just a human thing, really. I don't know. That's the whole point, isn't it? Yeah. Of the conversation, of the question. Yeah. What was the question again? I've like drifted. That was how comfortable were you with? Oh, how comfortable was I? Yeah. So maybe like not feeling fully comfortable with it at the moment. So I don't really. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think that comes with, like, also, I think I said to you ages ago when we were first talking about this, like, in terms of even career and stuff, you know, so, like, moving away from physical body and sexual orientation, all that kind of stuff, just, like, feeling in a really weird middle phase, and I don't know whether I'm going to start to feel more comfortable as I kind of move into like my chosen career and feeling a bit more settled in that, because at the moment I've kind of come out of a very long-term relationship, now in like this weird new phase of like being single, and like what does that
training
mean
to enter the new job.
Whilst training to enter the new job, like, you know, I was living in one situation and then had like a weird middle ground where I was living with a friend. Now finally in my own place where we're sitting now, but it's like everything just feels really in between at the moment, and I think that was kind of causing me stress. Because
you like a plan?
I love a plan. Like I love, you know, like my brain hates grey areas, you know. And I'm one big fucking grey area. So it's like a curse. That I have this like 50-50 brain that like part of it's like chaos and then the other part of it's like regime and structure, and so to be in all these these like weird spaces in between where I'm not quite a therapist, like I am a therapist, but like, you know what I mean, I'm not.
Currently, I mean, you're between, you know.
Yeah. I'm like some barista therapist hybrid at the moment, which I don't recommend to anybody.
I'm sure you're not alone though.
Oh no, I don't know. Like I'm speaking to many other people training as therapists.
Barista therapist?
Well, yeah. It could be a niche.
Chosen combo.
Yeah, exactly. Just making my clients super jacked up on coffee. But yeah, so it feels like my whole life and my whole sense of being at the moment is just in this in-between phase, and it's an exciting place to be, but it's quite scary and intimidating and overwhelming.
So not comfortable entirely yet, right?
No.
The following question, kind of, I think maybe. Actually, no. That's a different one. So there's two questions left. The one that I think I didn't ask as you were talking, but the one that I kind of want to ask, because it links back to the last question, was like, does your comfort, like we were saying with pride, does your comfort, you think, will it relate necessarily to society changing around you? You know, like, where will comfort come from? Is it all about re-examination of self? Because that is about, you know, accepting that. Is it about accepting that, you know, the world isn't going to change and that you need to become comfortable with that? Or, because it's not really about you necessarily, like, that you're uncomfortable with, right? I'm very comfortable being alone.
Yeah.
Right? Very comfortable being alone because it's the easiest thing in the world for me to just be alone.
Yeah, well, the same,
Exactly.
That's how, I love being on my own.
It's the best, you know. It's
Do
not
people
the best.
doubt you when you say that as well? Like, I get doubted a lot when, I don't know if it's particularly my position at the moment coming out of a relationship and stuff, but like when I tell people I love being on my own, they're like, are you sure? Like, they look concerned.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I fucking love being alone.
Yeah.
It's the bomb. You know, it's always been the easiest, right? And it's not that people are difficult or anything like this. It's just, you know, again, you're not, I don't know how to put it into words, and that's a whole separate conversation maybe, but when you enter into society, into relationships, your self becomes it becomes a premise of a relationship, right? Rather than just yourself, right? And so it's necessarily about other comfortability. Being comfortable is about other as well.
Yes.
The moment you're not alone. You know?
Yeah. As soon as I step out there, I've got to like put on like 50 different masks to like, depending on what situation I'm in.
So the question about comfort, is it like, if you didn't have to put the masks on, would you be more comfortable? And, you know, does that mean that there is an expectation for the world to change before you could be comfortable, right?
I mean, that would be lovely. Because when you just said then, if I went out without the mask on, like my first feeling was like, oh my god, you know, like because I was thinking about the world as it is now, and then going out without my mask on.
Right.
And I've learned to do it really well. I think also through working in hospitality, you know, you really have to like do that.
Dance.
Yeah. I think I don't think you can separate the two.
Explain.
Because so like I said, I'm like you in that like this is the first time in this part of my life now where I've lived on my own. And I was really scared about it. So like when I first came out of that very long relationship where I hadn't really been an adult on my own independently, I was almost convinced that I wasn't able to. Like I just wouldn't be able to function. And actually I'm now thriving and I love it. But then going out in the world again, I'm sort of trying to step into presenting as naturally as I can do.
Naturally
being
to yourself?
To myself, to other people, to sort of like gradually.
But naturally meaning what? Closest to your true sense of self as you are now?
Yeah. And so like trying not to hide my identity or like, just, so like I won't kind of like make a point of it, but I'll just casually mention it in conversation or, and like just sort of seeing how that feels. And if it's like not acknowledged or received kindly or whatever, then it's wonderful and like that feels nice. But I think generally in the world I understand that a lot of work needs to be done in terms of like being more accepting people.
Oh man, the world is fucked.
But there's beautiful elements.
Oh dude, the people are beautiful. Like it's not, I'm not saying the world is fucked.
Yeah, but this is what gives me hope though, because I'm always a glass half full kind of person. So even though I get down and out sometimes about stuff, like generally I don't get so down and out I can't physically move, because I always feel hopeful. Like I really
you need to know that tomorrow's another day, right?
Yeah, but like people show me on the daily as well that like there's beautiful things to enjoy and
fucking A.
Yeah, and so that keeps me going.
Everyone's living their lives, right?
Yes.
Just around you right now.
Yeah, but however, people in the world are also being killed for identifying
fucking
the way
crazy
that I do.
Shit.
So like
exactly.
But also down to things like is it going to affect my workplace? Is it going to affect my employment?
Yeah.
Do I state this to employers and stuff? Because
do you identify yourself on like government sort of documents, this kind of stuff?
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Your chosen pronouns and identification.
Well, some of them don't even give you the option.
Yeah.
So you have to pick one.
How about like Google and like shit like this?
Google and that I will now put like non-binary or gender non-conforming or whatever. But like but yeah, like at work, for example, like my boss is very, very religious. Yeah. And so I understand that her experience of the world is very different. Her morals and ethics are very different. Yeah. And that makes me cautious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that forces a mask? Is that kind of the point?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Very guarded.
Yeah.
I will go in with my Pride t-shirt on though, so it's the baby steps.
I've got my little badge. That's my claim.
Exactly.
The difference.
But I think the world definitely needs to change.
Yeah. Absolutely.
For people to feel safer.
Yes.
But it seems to be closing in more than anything right now.
It certainly is like another wave happening, another ripple, another wrinkle in the whole pattern of recent history for sure.
Yeah, you think in the States like how they're closing down on women's rights again.
Dude, I mean it's everywhere.
And it's the same fight as it's all interlinked to queer rights and trans rights and everything else. Like it's all
forms of difference and sharing power, organizing power differently, right?
Yeah.
That's fundamentally what it comes down to: is changing the rules, the laws, the concepts, and the words. Like it's changing the power structure, or it's changing the system. It's a move for a new. They say like the age of Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The next question was we've kind of addressed parts of it, and again the last one we've related to just now, but. What, if any, is the relationship between neurodivergence and identity? And especially when it relates to the liminal was the...
Yeah. I think that's been something that's made a ton of sense for me, because I think I read an article or a paper that was talking about how it's generally been studied quite recently, so they're still doing more studies on it, in that like how neurodivergent people, and especially people on the autism spectrum, just don't see gender, or they don't see it in the same way.
Yeah.
So it's not even like that important to a lot of people that they've studied.
Yeah.
And I think that made sense for me quite a lot, because it wasn't necessarily something that I ever thought was that important, but it felt like everyone else seemed to think it was very important.
Yeah.
And so therefore it would confuse me, because I'd just be like, I don't get why people are getting so caught up on this.
Yeah.
So kind of having these realizations of like figuring out that I had like a liminal identity when it came to gender, and then figuring out that I being told that I definitely had adult ADHD, and now being sent for an autism assessment, it kind of like makes sense. but it also made me laugh in terms of like being ADHD and potentially autistic at the same time as well, because they're two sides of a coin, of the same coin, that are like very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, it kind of, I don't know, when you said about identity as well, it kind of almost seems like that's part of my identity, and people get really caught up in being like, oh god, people like identify as their sexuality, but like that's how my brain is wired, so it's really hard to not have those as part and parcel.
Yeah. Like
sense.
having the sort of like the layered, again, sort of intersectional identity.
Yeah.
And the terms and sort of the because the terms are really just describing as close as possible like an experience.
Yes.
Right. What is a human experience? The word just exists to try and say that's what we're going to call that. You know, the titles aren't wrong. It's not like the question like, oh, why do you have to label it? Like, first of all, what's the point of the question? Just as a first point, what's the point of that question? Like, is it?
I mean, potentially, does it offend someone, or
but you know, why do you have to label it? Like, that's a very interesting question to assess what the purpose of, if you know, because you're saying it annoys you when people say that, respond to it in that way. Like, this is kind of, I think, what you're responding to now. You know, like ASD, ADHD, you know, neurodivergent, non-binary. I don't know. I kind of want to say, like, you know, the question, why do you have to label it, and dismissing it offhand as a result is just pushing the question away. Yeah. You know, in a way, like, that seems the purpose of that question to me. But I certainly feel like neurodivergence leads you to not have the same lens, right? And language is a lens. It's a lensing. It's like teaching you a lens, right? Yeah. Like, you don't have the same lens being English as someone Japanese. Just on the world, on reality. You don't have the same lens because your language is different, and language is the expression of a whole social network, right? It's our organization for the thing that we call society. Yeah. You know, really, it's like how you talk about everything, right? It's not who you are much closer to your feelings, right? And the words for identity, I think, trying to describe feelings and experiences, you know, those more subtle human aspects. Yeah. You know, so like labeling it isn't wrong, of course, right? Why do you think, how does ADHD relate to any of this? Because you brought it up, we haven't really related it back into liminality or identity. Does it relate in any way?
I think it does in terms of like potentially, like I said, like almost having two sides of a brain, in that I'm never one or the other. Or like I'm never just one thing, I'm like always one or the other, like or nothing. You know?
Switching.
Yeah. And it's quite exhausting to kind of have a brain that's like, I say potentially autistic, like I feel quite strongly that I am most probably autistic.
Yeah, sure.
But I haven't had my assessment yet. But like, it just feels like some days I'm either just like really chaotic and ADHD, and then other days I'm like very structured, and like even today at work I had like a moment where like the rule had changed and it hadn't been verbalized to me, and it like totally spun me out for like a good hour. Like I just couldn't function because I was so thrown off by this rule change. Yeah. But again, you know, that just makes me like, in that moment I just like, I was the only person in the room who didn't understand, and so it kind of put me back in that space of like not being one thing or another thing, and being a bit of an outsider almost, you know. Yeah. So and I have those experiences like all the time, you know. So it's kind of frustrating when, you know, this is going a bit tangent-y now, but you know, when people are like, no, but I do that, you know, it's a bit like like it's quite detrimental to like my well-being and you know, like when you were saying about developmental stuff. Yeah. You know, I've realised that I learn in a very different way to a lot of people, and it is it's tied into a lot of shame and like a lot of shoulds, and and so it's quite upsetting sometimes, and so I think it's really important to this kind of liminality and how I feel in the world. Yeah. Because if I was just ADHD, great, you know. Yeah. maybe it would be simpler, but
well, it's a different conversation if anything.
Well, yeah,
it's just
exactly.
how comfortable are you with ADHD,
Yeah.
rather than liminality and the multiple intersectional non followed by.
I feel like in a way I almost feel more conscious of the ADHD thing than anything else because it's such a buzzword right now.
Really?
So yeah. So
I would say autism is such a
that's
huge too. You know.
They're at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think because I've had a doctor say to me like you have adult ADHD, I feel more like legitimate to kind of talk about it. So I talk about that more than the autism side of things. It's an ongoing process at the moment because it is that white coat thing of like, well, someone official has said this is a thing. So
I was thinking of the concept of drugs and medicine as basically, you know, one has been prescribed and one hasn't. You know, one has been given permission for you to take.
Permission,
and one
that's it.
right?
Yeah,
that's it's permission. Yeah.
But then there's this feeling of like, I don't know if you've got ADHD that people just think that you've just like got it off Instagram and that it's an excuse for like, I don't know, like poor behaviour or like you know, being silly or like you know, just being chaotic for no reason.
An excuse for a shortcoming.
Yeah, and they're not seeing the internal distress that happens. So like, you know, when I make mistakes or I keep forgetting stuff or like the layers of shame that build up inside me are so horrendous.
My badness is that like, you know, where I am guilty of these things, right? Of like shaming or adding to the layers in any way, you know, because it's hard not to as well, you know. Yeah,
and it's also difficult when like, you know, people, neurodivergent people or like whoever are like, you're so trained to mask in the world that like you trick people into thinking that you're not having a bad time. Yeah. So even when you're having the worst time, you essentially don't want to make other people around you feel uncomfortable either. Yeah. Because it's then so much harder for you to deal with. So it goes back to that comfortable thing of like, well, it's way easier just to kind of just be like, oh, you know, never mind.
And I won't be
like,
rejected.
I won't be rejected, you know.
I won't be rejected, and I won't be shaming myself by making other people uncomfortable with me. Yeah.
So that in itself is liminal because I'm not being myself, but I'm also not being the full person that they want me to be. You know, I'm just like stuck in this weird phase. Yeah. So it kind of dictates my life in a way. Not dictates. I don't know.
No, but maybe
it has
in
power
the same
over
way.
them.
It has it's the thing that the identity aspects, I don't know what to call it, you know, the particular things about your identity that your identity being a huge part of what I think I'm gonna say is like whichever the part of your identity you're uncomfortable with is the one that you have had the most shame about, I think, in society, right? Like, because then naturally the pattern doesn't stop with me being affected by it and me masking, right? Like you said, it then becomes about what dynamic I create with the other person, and then what both people / what all of it becomes used to. Yeah. Until now you're just doing it whether or not you want it. And to change it is like a really layered process, you know? Yeah. Or either it's a separation, but then you've got the internalized process that you still need to layer out. Or it's a social process, you know, it's both at the same time, which is kind of what is happening. This is why we're talking about it now, right?
And then there's so many, you know, there's so many layers of grief in there as well, in time that's been lost and wasted, and versions of myself that I've had to let go of, you know, just like it's all kind of like wrapped up and buried in that. Yeah. That is a beautiful journey in therapy or in self-exploration, I think. I don't feel like I've done it as actively recently, but initially within counselling training, when I was exposed to therapy for the first time, because I'd never had therapy before starting to train as a therapist. And when I started sort of looking at that kind of unburdening process, it was really powerful, you know. It's huge, isn't it? I remember, like, you know, when I was going through therapy all of last year, thank God. I don't know.
While you're transitioning, not that you weren't transitioning before.
But like I had so many transitions, you know, like house moves and, you know, the relationship breakdown that I've mentioned, and you know, kind of like there was just so many, the training, itself, like, you know, just identity, everything. There was so many things. Twice, yeah. You know,
changing relationships so many more times, yeah.
It was just like, I don't know how I could have done it without the therapist that I had at the time. Like, I'm so grateful to have had that relationship, because there was a lot of shedding and a lot of going through really big, scary things that I think I remember saying to you maybe at the time when I was going through, like, I decided to go into those therapy sessions and be as honest as possible.
Yeah.
Which is often the game, but it's necessary, but I don't think I'd ever been quite as honest as I had in those sessions last year, where like I physically would like squirm in my chair. Like I remember
trying to get it out.
Yeah, and I was trying to hide from it physically, you know, but I knew it had to come out. And so I remember, like, even though I had online therapy, I'd be sitting in my chair, and I remember kind of literally like saying something one evening and just like literally just like being like this. And like all balled up with like my head in my knees, like, you know, just not looking at the screen, because it felt so deeply
difficult,
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But then, even though it was very difficult at the time, like the feeling coming out of it, like the lightness that you get eventually, is wonderful. And so I feel like, I don't know, I hope that that's going to come from this whole process in kind of a longer form kind of way.
Yeah, of course, by continuing the conversation, right? I just had a beautiful thought about internal conversations, but I want to get to the sixth question.
Okay.
How does the six... actually, I don't know if I want to ask this one, because I have a different question that I want to keep in here.
Okay.
And we've talked about that. So the final question is, what question would you like people to ask about liminal identity or about liminality? What would be the question that isn't sufficiently asked, or hasn't ever been asked, or that you would have liked?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That I don't even think I've thought about till now.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe like, I don't really know what the question is, but the first thing that popped into my head was sort of like, what do you need? Like, you know, what can we do for you?
Yeah.
And I don't even know whether I necessarily know, but just like, there's like a really comforting, loving thing in someone almost just being open enough to be like, I don't know what to do, but I'm here and let me help you, kind of thing. Because more often than not, as we've spoken about in depth, it is met with judgment or...
Yeah, because it's not saying I don't understand, it's saying, you know, who are you?
Yeah.
Let's you know, what can I do to be in that relationship?
Yeah.
And again, in that conversation of who are you?
Yeah.
To be part of that.
Because I'm aware as well, there's not really like, you know, there's not really a finite answer.
Yeah.
And it's shifting constantly.
Yeah.
But I think...
what do you need? What can I do? What can I do is a lovely question. If you move it into how can I help, that's a huge problem, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I don't fucking know.
How can I help? But no, it's pathologizing to say how can I help.
Yes, exactly. Because it like pushes to fix something.
Right?
Yeah. You know.
Or victimizing. What's the word? Maybe pathologizing. Fixing is absolutely.
Because there's so much of it. Excuse me. You know, like it's a bit like dealing with grief. You know, it's like it's quite close in terms of. You know, naturally when someone dies, normally people are just like, oh, you know, you'll get over it, it'll be okay, you know, like, and it's always kind of like pushing it away, because essentially it's making their feelings feel better rather than the person who's grieving, you know. And so I find that when I talk about anything to do with liminality or, you know, my gender or my identity or anything else, because people don't know what to do with it, which I'm fine with because I don't really know what to do with it, you know. They tend to just kind of go, oh, I don't really know much about that, or like they'll just talk about like another topic that's kind of vaguely linked, or, you know, but either way it kind of like pushes it away from you know, kind of just letting it be or letting it be vulnerable. So I think that would probably be the most
what do you need from us?
Are you asking me now?
No, well, I could ask you now. That was probably where I was going to go next, but I was more checking. What's the word? I wanted to use this word. Or just checking. Is that that's the proper phrasing? Is it?
Yeah.
What do you need from us? That's a great question. What do you need from us? From me? From us? Maybe off mic. Who knows? No, what do you need? I suppose it is the question. Is it always a question of in a relationship, like for a person to ask that, or should that be the new question? That is the response to new identity, new words, new titles. Is that the question that should be asked socially? Do you think?
I think it definitely should be asked more.
Yeah.
I don't know if it needs to be asked all the time, because I think sometimes just to have someone just see you is enough. Because again, rather than people pushing it away or being uncomfortable, like for people just to be able to sit in that space or with that person and
to change nothing and just be accepting.
Just be accepting is so powerful.
It's all that matters to de-shame. Right? Shame is simply about maybe I'm not acceptable. Maybe I'm.
Because you can't necessarily, like, if the question was first of all like what do you need? If you didn't trust that person in the first place, you know, if you don't have that level of acceptance, you're not going to take their help. You know, that space isn't available. But I think the first question maybe should always just be like, or not even a question, there should just be an acceptance. And
I was thinking in relationships, that's a lovely, it is like, just because you said it earlier, like there's a level of like wanting celebration for it, which is pride, right? Wanting pride for it as the first response. And from some people, I expect, not from everyone, maybe, but for it to be a celebrated point. And that's not what you experience. But that's kind of also just sitting with it in acceptance kind of does often present as a response of, okay. You know, I mean, like I knew, like, well, I guess, and then the question could be like, what do you need? What do you want? Need from us then? Because it's continuing the conversation, but you know, it's still not celebration as such. It's
still just out in the ether. Then I'm just back in the void.
Sorry, I just pushed the boat back out.
Close that up quite nicely. We're just like,
oh no.
No, you didn't. I just mean it in terms of
I know.
You know, if someone's just like, cool.
Yeah, I was going to go into something that maybe is pushing the boat out. Actually,
go on.
Is like then it becomes a question of like how you feel about asking for things, right? Because with the conditioning that comes, a lot of the problem then becomes about you not feeling free to ask these things, or you not feeling able to ask these things. Then in some ways it kind of begins with that. Like if everyone on a daily basis was asking directly and clearly in a way that's fair and tolerant and respectful and respecting and whatever. What they needed all the time, like in a quiet assertion, right? Presumably there would be fewer of the problems in my mind, right? And that's maybe what the growing conversation's about, is trying to create more and more spaces where it is possible just to ask, just to say without fear, right? And you're saying in your workspace that's not entirely possible. At least for you in your mind right now, whether or not they respond in one way.
And it has been in a lot of workplaces as well, you know, like but just in life in general, like I think I've always felt like as a kid I was always kind of like, everyone was referred to me as like, oh, you know, she's just the quiet one, or like, you know, she's the one that doesn't talk, or you know, and I was always seen as therefore I was categorized as a good child because I was unoffensive, I was quiet, but really I remember feeling quite a lot as a young person, but then also, you know, as we carry those inner child parts with us, like as an adult, there's still those moments that I'm really working on where I don't ask for stuff because I'm scared of the repercussions or how it might be perceived and stuff. So asking is something that I'm really building on, you know, trying not to be, and also kind of accepting that if somebody has a negative response to me asking, then I'm just like, well, that's not a problem for me, that's something they're dealing with. You know? And
then it becomes a whole different conversation about how do you get comfortable with me.
Exactly,
rather than, you know, how can you help me become more comfortable with being alive. Because how can I celebrate and feel full if I feel, I think the word I think that came into my mind was like shrinking, like I feel like there was a question a long time ago asked by a friend of mine, and it was to examine your life as what makes you expand and what makes you contract, you know, or what you expand in, or what you and what you contract to from, you know, because of whatever.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question, I think. You know?
I like that question.
Yeah.
I feel like
How did it feel? Did it feel expansive or contracting? You know, like it's a good question.
It's a great question.
It's a great question.
Like I definitely recognise, especially recently, like I feel joyful, like when I'm having conversations like this, like when I'm really connecting with people that I really care about.
Real, when you're seeing and sharing with people.
But also like times when
there should be fire. Like that's the only thing that's missing here is like fire. I think I think fire is primordial, right? Like it is necessary really to every conversation. But usually we don't have it, we have lights instead.
Exactly. My landlord would be very upset.
Just burning a carpet fire.
This lovely polyester carpet or whatever it is.
No. That's kind of what, you know, you said the rock lamp was like embryonic. It's almost fire-like too. It's very
exactly,
flamey.
Yeah. But those things make me feel expansive, you know, and I think that's something that I mentioned recently. I'm trying to sort of focus on this whole, I want to step into my joy as well, because I feel like feeling neutral quite a lot of the time is quite scary. Yeah. Even though I do feel quite neutral a lot of the time, and it can be quite nice. Yeah. But
what does feeling neutral mean in terms of the feeling? Is it something that is describable? Have you found in yourself like a way of understanding what's describing what neutral feels like?
Yeah, I think I feel there are times where I just don't have any emotions towards anything.
That's the classic. What I would understand as neutral. It's just not responding. Just non-responsive.
And I have it quite a lot in my day.
In an emotional sense.
I'm going to say my working day because we spend most of our lives at work, you know, but like I have a lot of experiences at work where like I'll have a conversation with someone and I don't pick up on certain cues but I feel very neutral. Like people will tell me like big bits of information that are quite like, you know, normally somebody would be like, oh, whoa, you know, and I just go, oh, okay. Yeah. And they're like, well, don't you think that's crazy? And I'm like, yeah.
Should I? You're really asking the question.
Yeah, like I'm like, it comes back to that whole like feeling like an alien in a meat suit thing.
Man,
you know,
alien
like,
is real.
Alien is real. I don't know why it's taking me so long to bring up that word right now.
Alienation is huge.
There's been a lot of hovering in space, so you know. But yeah, so I have like neutral moments like that, like a lot of my day, all the time. It's part of my being. So it makes me even more excited when I'm emotional on either side of the scale, I guess, because like I'm like, whoa, I'm feeling something, you know. Like, and even if I'm feeling something that's really sad or I'm crying, then I'm like, cool, you know, that's an emotion. But you know. So
stepping into joy is means what then?
Well, it tackles liminality. For one, you know, which is cool.
What do you mean it tackles liminality?
Well, because like, you know, I think this whole thing has been about like trying to accept and celebrate my liminality, but like it can be quite lonely and sad and unemotive and vast, and I feel sometimes disconnected in it as well. So to do things that bring me joy is really wonderful. And sort of really nailing, and I think that comes back to identity again. It's sort of looping back around to that, like kind of really figuring out what pushes my buttons and what things I really love and what I don't, and being quite clear in those as well, which again tackles that liminality. So
it's like organising your life around and with the sort of information you need and that that's good for you. The data, to go back to the machine analogy. You know, what data do you want to feed into the machine? You know? Yeah. Because that's ultimately what the choice comes down to, right? It's how are you going to spend your time? You know?
Yeah. Hopefully laying in moss.
Moss is great.
Touching mushrooms. You know?
Mushrooms are incredible. They really are.
It's going to be a whole other podcast now.
Oh, mate, I would go there. I would. But no, that's the end of the podcast, I'd say. Thank you so much, man.
Thank
Such
you.
A privilege.
It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, honestly. And whoever's listening, if you are, thank you too, man. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do about listeners. So Thank you
just
for
force it upon people. I think. Like, you remember when U2 that one time just made everybody have one of their tracks?
Fucking put it on Spotify,
yeah.
but on your phone, like on what was it, iTunes?
Whenever you're stuck, just be like, what would U2 do? I think
the problem wasn't it that it just got that like when your phone ran to the end of like a playlist on iTunes, it would then go back to YouTube.
This is what we're gonna do. This is what we're gonna do with the podcast.
Yeah, I mean it should be that way. This is important stuff. Everyone needs to hear this.
Yeah, you are welcome for that idea.
No, thank you so much for being here, though. For being willing. I guess we should leave it there then. Sure. I don't know if there's a bye moment, but I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you.
Go for it. It's been wonderful. Thank you. We can go and eat the rest of the bowl of M&Ms now.
May, there's a lot. There's a lot.
I know. I wasn't thinking that we were going to eat them all tonight.
But now challenge accepted, maybe.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's the end of the recording with Jacqui. I've got a bit of time here, and I was, listening to the episode again, making sure it's all, clean enough, despite being just, footage of a conversation. And, there's one thing I feel silly about, but most importantly, I think that I would have preferred in this episode to give much more space to Jacqui's voice. I think I talked a bit too much here, which is a pleasure, to talk with Jacqui, just to be excited and chat with her. But I would have liked to hear more of her voice and more of her, or not even of her. This is the point, isn't it? I'm using the word her, but of Jacqui's, experience, and just giving more space for that. And this is a learning curve. I think it's all important to, check what you're doing and then to own it, right? So yeah, I'd like to change that. But it was a beautiful conversation, and I loved spending the time that we did together on that episode. And we had a few good laughs, so it was lovely. Right, that's basically all I had to say. Additional to the episode. So I hope it was a good one. I hope that you enjoyed it. When I listened to it, I doodled for like an hour and a half, because it was about an hour and a half, and then I wrote my will and testament. Just hand wrote it. And it was a good time. Time well spent. Thank you, Jacqui, again. I don't know if she wants me to plug her or not, so I won't give any of her, their Jacqui's, professional or personal details out, but she's more welcome to put them here. So yeah, awesome. See you next time. Bye.
No, it's
This is
to
my
see how
massive
it works.
dry spell.
One massive dry spell is the first line of the podcast episode.
You can title it that.
I
by
think
the
so.
way.
Yeah, I think I will. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just sad because you want to be wanted, don't you? And you want to be like cherished, and you have this person who apparently loves you and wants to be with you, but then isn't showing you. Like, because for me, sex is important, but at the same time, it's not number one. But he wasn't like bringing any of the other important factors of a relationship either. Which then means that you can't feel safe or trusting. So then to be like sexually open, that kind of shuts that down already. You know.
So I included this like section of the recording. It kind of came before everything else, but it was a pure accident that it ended up having this sort of speed and tone that it did. But I wanted to keep it because it really plays with that concept of gender being a construction, you know, that just by slowing down the pace of someone's speech, it changes the tone of their voice, and it gives it a very different texture, a very different sense of identity. And because it was an accident, I took that as fate, and I thought it should be kept, and so it's still there, just as a little nod to that point. So yeah, thanks for listening.